we finally come to the end of our series on critical thinking for Christians. We have just come out of a very fun, very playful 8-week study, a small group study at the church on critical thinking for Christians. I've got some of my paperwork here. We talked about the proper use of statistics and how to lie with statistics. We talked about burden of proof and how to make judgment calls when you are forced to make a call and you don't have enough information to make it, sure. We talked about using analogies, another illustration to match this one. We talked about hypothetical logic, the use of science, and then last week, and I didn't put this on the video, but last week we got into symbolic logic and categorical logic and syllogisms, which was really complex and kind of confusing. And I started to put a synopsis of it for the last 8 weeks, or at least the first 6 weeks. I put a synopsis of our study the next day on Wednesday for devotions, but I just didn't know quite how to do that one. Seems kind of interesting, doesn't it, that a church would have not a Bible study or something like that, or a theological study, but a study on critical thinking and logic. These days I see a lot of people decrying the ills of our society. I see a lot of people talk about how divided we are as a nation. And I see a lot of people kind of blaming Christians as being conservative and being on the political right. And I see a lot of memes on Facebook and places that kind of make fun of the church. What I don't see is a lot of people stepping in to make a difference. We can label problems in our society. Actually making a difference? Now, how do we do that? Well, when you think of that, it makes a lot of sense to have a course on logic and critical thinking. I mean, churches have courses on marriage and how to get along in a marriage. They have courses on theology. They have courses on just all sorts of different things. Sometimes on how to manage your money. What about how to think for yourself? How to weigh out solid sources of information from weak sources of information? How about how to step away from the pack and be your own person? How about how to be confident that you've explored a subject and you feel comfortable with your outcome, with your beliefs on the subject, but still open to the possibility that you don't know everything, and rather than getting in a shouting match, centering into a dialogue. See, I don't see a lot of that. I see a lot of us pretty much naming the problem, but not working on fixing the problem. There are maybe 40 or 50 of you that every week on Wednesdays tune into these devotions from the Littleton United Methodist Church. Some of you tune in through and watch them through the Facebook channel or Facebook page, some of them through the YouTube channel. And of the 40 or 50 or so that log on, several of you have been part of the discussion, the class for the last 8 weeks. So you might ask yourself, well, now what do we do? It was a fun class. We laughed a lot. We played a lot. We ate a lot. So now what do we do with it? I think this video will be kind of a wrap up about that. Well, first of all, the thought that comes to my mind is that we could go back over the videos. They're only, 10, 15, maybe 15 minutes a week. We could go back over those videos. We could go back over the sheets that we handed out and review what we've just learned. Oh, we don't have to know the difference between inductive and deductive in that way. And we don't have to know what forms or modus ponens or modus tollens or what's a valid or invalid form or something like that. But the benefit I find is not in memorizing all the confusing details. The memory of a time like this, the value of it is that we start to get a feel of when things just aren't quite right. I mean, we may not say, oh, that is, this kind of disjunctive syllogism or something like that. We may not say that. What we might say, though, is something doesn't seem right with that. Where did those stats come from? Are they measuring apples with oranges there? Are they staying true? Or this authority that they use, this expert, does that seem like much of an expert? Is there somebody trying to pull the wool over our eyes? Or are they pulling a red herring? Are they pulling us away, from a subject that's getting a little too hot to handle? And those things can kind of become second nature. The more you look at them and ponder them and recognize them, the more you're just kind of walking along. When I was a kid, my dad was good at finding four-leaf clovers out in fields. We used to say he could just about trip over them. He'd just be walking along and bend to stop and bend down and pick up a four-leaf clover. Well, it's kind of like that with logic and critical thinking. Even if you don't have all the things memorized and don't think you feel comfortable, taking some kind of final exam for a college class, you start to get a feel if something is not quite right. That's a good place to be. I suppose another benefit over a lifetime is that your thought processes tend to mature. A few months ago, I did a midweek devotion on heuristic thought. That is, the ability to be pretty confident that you know what you believe and you know what you're talking about because you've examined it very carefully and are pretty comfortable that you have a grasp on it, but at the very same time, realizing you don't know everything. And there may be new data that could be inputted into your collection of data on this subject that would maybe modify, maybe not modify, but kind of enlighten and mature that thought process. I've read some theologians that by the time they were 20 years old, they had their theologies nailed down and ironclad. And other theologians that were pretty confusing, actually, because they might live into their 80s and the things they taught in their 60s and 70s and 80s were different than their 20s and 30s and 40s. And sometimes you think, well, can't they get it straight? But what was happening was they were maturing and growing and learning in a way that some people just never do. The ability to carefully think through and weigh new ideas without becoming threatened or frightened, to be able to engage in conversation without having to win, to not be keyed up ready for a fight all the time, to not be gullible when people try to take you in with data that just isn't sufficient or that isn't very strong. Realizing that how loud they speak or how forceful they try to twist your emotional arm behind your back, that doesn't mean that their view is correct. The ability to grow and mature over a lifetime in your thought processes, these are big benefits. But now perhaps the most important benefit that you can help with, that is one of the reasons I thought of doing this class, and that some of my students asked me to do this class. And that is, we do live in a divided world. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." And we get caught up in the world like everybody else, and we're not exactly, as Christians today, thought of as peacemakers in this world. Well, if we can bring down the temperature of the heated discourses in our society and arguing back and forth, if we can find a way to not give people lectures and be obnoxious and a pain in the neck and tell everybody they're not thinking correctly, but if we can just lower a little bit, or build confidence a little bit, or listen a little more, or say a few things that actually are wise instead of adding fuel to the fire, couldn't we make a big difference? Wouldn't it be something if the church were recognized as compassionate and caring and peacemakers instead of polarized with everyone else? If we were calm instead of loud? How much does the world need that right now? We can be a part of it. You can be a part of it. In a very small way, you can be a part of a really big difference by learning how to step out from the pack. For better or worse, we've come to the end of this particular study of logic and critical thinking. Next week, when you tune in to this broadcast or podcast, it'll be back to a more traditional style of devotion. But we have a few days left this week, and during this week, it's very likely you're going to be a party of or a witness to some conversations that are not the most logical. May God bless you and give you wisdom and help you bring some peace into a world of turmoil.